Well, now you're in for our closing treat. You've hopefully, if you haven't already gotten a copy of the Carbon Almanac, we have plenty of copies. As you heard, you're welcome to take more than one. Seth Godin, everybody's known of Seth Godin for a long time as one of the great masters of marketing and marketing communications and theory of successful communication in business for a long, long time. He is now what he calls the founding editor of the Carbon Almanac, which is an impressive gathering of tools and ideas for how we can collectively move forward. I'm going to turn the stage over in a way we haven't all day to one person, and he's going to take it away. So Seth, you're a master at this. Go for it.
Thank you. I got to say, this is the smartest audience I've talked to in a very long time, and I'm a little intimidated, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes or so. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of building the almanac, because I think there's a metaphor there, but mostly I want to talk about a bigger idea. I hope we can agree, after hearing all of these engaged, brilliant people, that the problem we are facing is complicated. I think that it's pretty truthful to say it's complicated. And what I want to start by saying is, it's also really simple. It's simple, but we don't want to look at the core of it. So let's start with a simple example. Let's say you're a James Bond villain, and it's 1625, and you've decided that your mission is to kill all the whales. Now, one way you could kill all the whales is you get some giant space-carried laser beam and find whales in the ocean and kill them, but those hadn't been invented yet. The other thing you could do is teach people about whale oil. Because if people learned about whale oil, some people would build whale oil refineries, some people would start selling whale oil lanterns, and some people would go hunt whales. And as a result, over the next 100 or so years, whales would go right to the verge of extinction. Not because there were any evil people trying to kill all the whales, but because a system was built in which the death of whales was essential. And you know what saved the whales? It wasn't Greenpeace. It was kerosene. Kerosene saved the whales, because kerosene was an easier and cheaper way to light your house at night. So here's the thing we need to take away when we think about this. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of background on my journey here. 16 years ago, I wrote my first blog post about climate change. It did not solve the problem. I did my best, so I moved on to other things. But it became clear to me after reading the essential book, Ministry for the Future, which anyone in your line of work must read or listen to on audio. The audiobook's amazing. In the next week, the first 20 pages will break your heart and give you nightmares, but you got to stick it out. After reading Ministry for the Future, I said, I'm not smart enough about this. I've been hiding from this. If I'm doing that, I bet you other people are too. And so I decided not to build an almanac, which I've done more than almost any living being. I did the business almanac, the celebrity almanac, the women's almanac years and years and years ago. I said, why don't I just make this a metaphor? How do we organize around this? And I organized 300 people in 41 countries. I'm a volunteer. I haven't gotten paid a penny in the last 53 weeks of full-time work, and I don't get any royalties from the book either. All of us worked for free, and we built a 97,000-word almanac, edited it, fact-checked it, footnoted every single page, illustrated it, etc., in 5 months with no one in charge. And that is a metaphor for what is possible if we're going to change things. But here's some of what I learned. What I learned is that we built a system. And when you build a system, you should not be surprised if the system gives you what the system was built for, particularly if that's what you've been measuring. And about 1909, do the math, we built a system. And the system was get cheap energy and turn it into things that make life more convenient for privileged folks. That is the world we have lived in since you were born. Turn cheap energy into convenience. And we invented ways to keep score if we were doing well with that system, like profit, like stock price, like I'm just doing my job. And that built every brand you have ever heard of. That built every organization. And in fact, it made us all rich. There are more rich people on the planet Earth than ever before. The percentage of people on Earth that are truly, truly poor is lower than ever before. It fed us and it clothed us. And that system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It took cheap energy out of the ground, it burned it, and it turned it into convenience. And the thing is that the Earth is going to be fine. 100 years from now, 200 years from now, it's still going to be here. But we probably won't. Not if this system continues to do what it's doing. So we're not here to save the Earth. We're here to say, is the system getting us what we set out for the system to do? The answer is yes. And then the question is, what should we do? Well, one thing we could do is put several veneers of indirection and greenwashing on top of the system to make it look like we're changing the system, but keep doing the system because we're just doing our job. An ad agency named Ogilvy and Mather got hired by a company called British Petroleum, and they invented the phrase carbon footprint, one of the greatest marketing triumphs of all time. It makes me want to throw up every time I think about it. Carbon footprint was designed to make the people in this room feel guilty so that we would realize we were hypocrites, so we wouldn't speak up about changing the system, because after all, we're not perfect. Around the same time, the people in the plastics industry had some meetings and they said, we got troubles because plastics are filling our oceans and our streets. So they invented plastics recycling, even though they know it's a fraud. Even though when you put that plastic bottle in the blue bin, it is going to get collected and incinerated. You have just done a tiny bit of pre-sorting for the incineration people. And when I tell people this, it makes them uncomfortable. And then tomorrow, they put the plastic bottle in the recycling bin. And the reason they do that is because the system is the one we've lived with our whole lives. That the number one thing that the richest country in the world could do in one day to eliminate more than 20% of the climate problem, in one day, with no other activity necessary, is just walk away from cows. Just do it. Just walk away from cows. No milk, no cheese, no meat, beef. If we just did that, it would make this spectacular shift, but we won't, and we haven't. And in fact, every country that gets richer, one of the very first things they do is start eating more meat. And if people around the world ate meat the way we eat meat in the United States, we would need a whole other planet just to hold the cows. I'm not exaggerating that. You can look it up. Every single page of this book has a footnote, and the footnote is a vetted source online, not from us. A whole other planet. This isn't even about carbon. This is just about the physics of how much room a cow takes up. But as soon as we start talking about this, someone says, well, what about regenerative agriculture? I only buy this kind of fancy organic beef from happy cows and blah, 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 blah. We'd still need a whole other planet to hold the cows more, because they take up more room when you do it that way. My point is we need to look at the system. And that gets me to the business part of why I wanted to come today, because there's some really good people running this event, and when they asked me to come, it was an instant yes. So 20 years ago, I gave a speech to the Newspaper Publishers of America. I don't know if Rick was there or not. Maybe you were. But I explained to them in detail, not because I'm a genius, but because I could see what was happening. I said, there is no newspaper represented in this room that's going to be the same as it is now in 20 years. You can't outlast the internet. And they're like, yeah, we can. We'll take that bet. And they're all gone. They were either transformed or they disappeared. And I gave a talk the next year to travel agents. And I said, there's not one travel agent left in this room who's going to be a travel agent in 20 years, because why would I call a travel agent and wait 2 days and pay you money when I can just go to whatever is going to be called kayak and do that? And they're like, we'll take that bet. What does the internet want? Was the simple equation that you needed if you wanted to get rich for the last 20 years. For the last 20 years, if you gave the internet what it wanted, the system was going to reward you. And the question you need to ask yourself now is, what does the climate want? And what the climate doesn't want is for us to do what we used to do, but a little bit more recycled. What the climate doesn't want is for us to have systems that enable people to have better lives that involve them increasing the amount of carbon we are putting into the atmosphere, because it just doesn't work. So I could paddle my canoe from here to where I live, up the Hudson River, 15 miles away. New York City almost closed about 120 years ago. And the reason is because the Hudson River was a sewer. And people were peeing in the river, and people were drinking the water from the river, because that's where the water came from. We had to filter it, right? But it was not sustainable. They did not say, hey, everybody, please, 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 stop peeing in the river. What they said is, you're not allowed to pee in the river anymore, because it's killing people. And then they also built the sewer system. And the combination of those two things enabled us to build New York City as we know it. So where we are right now is at a crossroads with two elements, and then I'm going to stop ranting and we can talk about whatever you want. The first one is this. If you are looking to actually transform your business, you need to ask, what does the climate want? Not what will please the shareholders for the next month, what makes life more convenient for people, but is also sort of good for the environment, but what does the climate want? And the second thing is the short version, because we've indoctrinated everybody on this planet to look for things that are cost efficient and increase our status and affiliation, our wealth and our convenience, is we have to start pricing carbon fairly. If the price of carbon was correct, give a dividend back to every single person equal to the amount that they started with. If the price of carbon was correct, the market would get really smart, really, really fast. And if you care, not even about your children or grandchildren, but just about the obligation that we have to do what we can with the leverage we have, with the privilege and the status we have, that's what we need to do. We need to dramatically change our systems, and the way we will do that is by talking about it. And so the reason this exists, and the reason it was worth my time and the time of the people who worked on it, is so you can talk about it. Not proselytize to them, but just hand it to them and say, which one page of this is worth discussing, and what are we going to do about it? And it's the most important project of my lifetime, and probably yours. So that's why I ranted about it. But I promised I would do Q&A, because that's why I came. What do you want to talk about? We have microphones. Bring it on. Thank you, my friend. Good to see you. Thank you. Yes, sir, right here in the center. Here's your microphone.
Are you familiar with James Lovelock?
James Lovelock. He wants you to say who you are.
Jonathan Russo, I write for Worth.
Write for Worth, okay. The name doesn't ring a bell, but that doesn't mean I don't know who he is.
James Lovelock wrote Gaia Theory.
Yes.
Okay, you're familiar. I urge everybody here to read about Gaia Theory. James Lovelock died about a month ago at 103. His spirit hovers over this entire seminar, this webinar, whatever we're doing here. Please read Gaia Theory. He outlined about the Earth and what the Earth wanted. He wrote a book recently in 2016 called Revenge of Gaia. There's nothing here that he didn't explain 55 years ago. Right.
Thank you.
So I really just urge people to read about Gaia Theory. Thank
Noted.
you.
Who's got a question? Over here we have one. Yes, please. Thank you for that tip.
Hi, my name is Rachna Shah. I work for Common Ground Compost, a zero waste services company here in New York City. With any other, I work with waste, so with any other company, they have to pay by the ton for the waste that they produce. And yet, these companies that create emissions don't have to pay a dime, it seems like, and they're basically using our atmosphere as their personal sewer system. So, yep. That being said, carbon taxes and carbon fees have been fought. So it's like the system now is so big, we cannot put these fees that are just make complete sense to anybody in place. So my question to you is, do you see any movement there, or do we have to always go around it?
So again, when we talk about changing a system, when we're in the system, it's very difficult to even have the conversation. However, we have seen the system we live in the United States, governance-wise, shift dramatically because small groups of people have persistently and consistently spoken up. And I won't bring up those issues, but you know which ones I'm talking about. And here's the thing. You can get elected in almost any precinct in the United States for almost any office without the first, second, and third question being about carbon pricing. If the first, second, and third question you get asked every time you go anywhere is about carbon pricing, things are going to change. But the government is a trailing indicator. It is almost never a leading indicator. And what has been missing is people looking for a short, simple, convenient solution. Oh, I know, I'll recycle my plastic, as opposed to a long-term, concerted, community thing to just keep talking about it. Because you're right, the vast majority of people in this country would happily take a $3,000 check in the mail to make up for a $3,000 carbon pricing adjustment at the border. They break even, but it would change everything. It would change it in a week. But we're not asking about it enough. We're not talking about it enough. And they don't have Meatless Monday at your kid's school cafeteria. Do you know how many people you need to do that? Not very many. My town, leaf blowers against the law. One cool statistic from the Carbon Almanac. 1 hour of a leaf blower is the same as driving a Toyota Camry to Los Angeles from here. 1 hour, the same amount of carbon. Leaf blowers with gas should be against the law. You don't need more than 100 people to ban leaf blowers. Why aren't we doing it? Because we're afraid to talk about it, because it means we reveal the system. And there's a man behind the curtain, and we should just move the curtain.
Seth, I'm over here, David, with the mic.
Hi, David.
Luckily, I can just take the mic. But we had a series of roundtables leading up to this conference today. One of them was on carbon accounting, and a really amazing comment was made that, and you hit it right on with the carbon border adjustment taxes, which Europe is imposing. And the thing that's great, Europe is leading yet again, and they're going to cause the whole world to change because, as this guy was explaining, if Europe imposes a carbon tax at the border,
right,
basically we will have to do the same or we will be uncompetitive.
Correct.
And it also means we will have to be conscious of the costs we're paying going into Europe. But the great thing about it is that the only reason Europe can have a carbon border tax is because they have a price for carbon in Europe, which we do not have. But once we introduce a carbon border tax, we will have to also have a price for carbon. Elizabeth, is that right, of EDF?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Let me try to tell the story, if I could, or do you want to do it? Go ahead.
I want to hear from EDF on it.
This is not my area of expertise. I cannot believe you're doing this to me, David. I think the overall message here, and I was not expecting to say this, is when you think about a price on carbon, there's a lot of different ways to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it need not be a tax. And you could do a cap on emissions and get at this. You could do companies can put performance specifications on their supply chain. I mean, that kind of does the same thing. It's getting at that same result, and there are a lot of different strategies.
Yeah.
That's
And
the
it doesn't
message
matter,
we need
but it will
to
disrupt the
have.
system,
Yes,
whatever we
disrupt
do.
the system.
Exactly. There's a question right there from Max.
Hi, thanks, Seth. Max Bowman from Skytree. We're a direct air capture company. So we keep track of carbon tax and carbon credits pretty closely.
Yes.
And we were really interested to see in the new IRA bill, Inflation Reduction Act, how Biden and al. have introduced a carbon credit price of, I think, $180 now. They're called 45Qs. We thought that was really interesting, and actually, frankly, maybe even puts US ahead of Europe now. Do you have thoughts on that?
Again, everything I've said today is my opinion, not the opinion of the hundreds of people who worked on this. But from what I can see, and I interviewed directly some people who work in what you do, the scale of direct air carbon capture is so tiny. The biggest plant ever built is the equivalent of, I think, 5,000 or 10,000 cars worth of emissions. And the chemistry behind it is so sketchy that what it's being used for now is airlines saying it's okay for us to go make an order for 20 supersonic jets because 15 years from now it'll be working. And so my take is that Band-Aids of whatever kind need to be avoided. We just need to say we have an infection. Putting a bandage on it of any kind is not the answer. The answer is, what are we going to do about this system? The market is really, really good at paying attention. And what it pays attention to right now is convenience and price. And so the single best thing to do is reveal to the market what the price of carbon actually is, because that will put all these forces to work. I blogged a couple weeks ago about yoga blocks. I needed to buy some yoga blocks. Yoga blocks, as you know, are made of oil foam, but they last a really long time, so you could argue you're only going to buy yoga blocks once in your life. But the yoga blocks I got were wrapped in plastic, and that was wrapped in a plastic branding bag, and that was wrapped in plastic. And I called up the CEO of the company, and I said, you're the biggest, you're Earth-centric, that's the name, Gaian, right? Like, what are you doing? And he said, we have to do that, because if we don't, Dick's and Amazon won't sell our stuff, because they need it to be in that, because it makes it faster and more convenient for them. Well, the solution's simple, not to find every example of this, just make plastic wrap too expensive. And if you did that, the other ones would be cheaper, and that's what people would buy. So I don't know how to implement that. I just know we're not talking about it enough. And I don't think lobbying from any given industry is the answer. I think we just got to say, oh, the system is based on a flaw. Sir, you had a question right behind Max. And then someone back there? Yeah.
To get people to stop using plastic bags then.
Understood, because it's built into the system. Yes.
Yeah, I'm John Suter from Reedus Associates. Thanks for being here. When Greta Thunberg was here in New York, there was a woman in the audience that was holding up a sign that said, "No Fly Wednesdays," implying that the airlines should just take a vacation on Wednesday. And I thought about that, and I actually wrote to all the major airlines here in the States, and I got one nice letter from the PR department. But I thought it really is up to the flying public if they want. Because if you think about all major religions have a sacred day, a day of rest. Why couldn't the airlines have a Wednesday when nobody flies? And it could be done from the consumers.
It's fascinating to think about. I think that, they're still arguing about leaving at 3 a.m. from Kennedy, so they don't even want to stop in the middle of the night. Again, it's about systems. I haven't been on an airplane in 2 years. I don't fly to speak anymore. I can't solve the problem by myself. Voluntary action is not going to solve this problem. We have made that clear. Really good people are voluntarily doing interesting things, but one person who's racing to the bottom to make an extra buck is lobbying for a coal plant. So again, systemic action is the way we solve a systemic problem. We have a systemic problem. Would I be opposed to No Fly Wednesday? No. If it got us to No Fly Thursday, et cetera. But we need a system solution. Not perfect, but a step forward. We had someone back there first. Yes, please. Hi.
Hi, Seth. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Chris Dowd. I work for Daluz Capital. We're an early stage venture fund in Latin America, one of the only that focuses on early stage climate innovation investing. I'm an American. I've been living in Latin America for the last 2 years. Have seen quite a bit of examples of climate innovation, whether that be startups or organizing practices.
I need to get you to go a little faster because my timer's going.
Totally. Curious, this book has a global scope. What lessons do you take from other parts of the world outside of Europe and the United States that we can use in the United States to accelerate our path to decarbonization?
That's a great question. We made it as global as we could. The biggest solar plant in the world is in India. And China has put up enough solar farms in the last year to replace 52 coal plants if they want to. And much of the world is on a no-meat diet, and the ones that aren't use it as a treat. There's all sorts of ways that people in the world are living that are interesting. Europe, as you pointed out, is doing some smart things in governance. But I think here's what we're going to see. The opening 15 pages of Ministry for the Future, the heartbreaking part, 15 million people die in 1 week in India from a heat wave. When it becomes 138 degrees Fahrenheit, humans cannot survive, even in the shade, even in a lake. That's going to happen. And it's probably not going to happen in New York. It's going to happen in a place that has been previously colonized. It's going to happen in a place where human beings didn't do this to the world. And what are we going to do when 4 million climate refugees show up here? We can't pretend the rest of the world isn't there. The rest of the world is there, and they're going to come here because they need a place to go. And so, yeah, there's some really cool lessons and groups doing interesting things. But I think we need to think hard about the fact that, as Lovelock wrote about, there's only one planet we can survive on, and it's not Mars. Yes, hi.
Seth, it's really interesting stuff. I think it very thought-provoking. you have obviously taken the model farther. Tell us about it. And what I'm talking about is if everybody converted to be a vegetarian, we need another planet for vegetables. And if we're just
Not true.
fish, we need another.
That's not true. You're welcome to be a troll, but this is simply not true.
No, so you have no limit on the population that this
No,
Earth can
there's
support.
clearly a carrying capacity of the Earth, but we lowered the carrying capacity of the Earth dramatically when we started raising livestock. We did not increase our carrying capacity, we lowered it. If you read the great book, The Wizard and the Prophet, it goes into detail. It's a history book, but it's fantastic, about two men who changed our planet. One won the Nobel Prize for the Green Revolution for feeding the poor in Mexico and China and other places, and the other one was the father of the modern environmental movement. Both were right, both were wrong. They only met once or twice in their lives, and it's a narrative of how they intertwined. But forgive me, but I have no time for trolls. If you don't want to talk about it, I get it. If you don't want to do the math, I get it. But what we have to do as a community is not pick one thing that's not perfect or one thing that's unexplored. What we have to do is say, let's really look at the system. And it's telling me I'm out of time, so I'm going to see what that means.
You can finish and keep. We have one more question
Okay,
back
we'll do
there.
another question back there. But I think it's important that we talk to each other in this room to say, do you even see the system? And if we see the system, how do we talk to people who aren't in this room about how the system has been built? It's been built on cheap oil and no price for dumping the stuff into the air. Those two things are true. Yes,
So I think
please.
this dovetails well. My name is Ashley. I'm the CEO of Alma Health, an eco-femtech company. How do we use your marketing genius to help move forward the dialogue and help change consumer behavior?
I'm going to take a pass on the marketing genius part. Marketing has shifted quite a bit since I first started writing about it. But what essentially we get to do if we're doing something called marketing is we tell a story that resonates with people. It's a story about status or affiliation. Status is who do you have more than, right? The Forbes 400 did an enormous amount of damage because every time it comes out, 399 people feel their penis get a little bit smaller and then have to race a little bit harder to move up. And status is centered in places like New York City. We see it played against itself all the time, right? It's not clear to me that you need to take a private jet 18 miles to go to a meeting. And affiliation is what do people like us do? People like us do things like this. And if we think about what human beings have been able to do, right? We paved the earth in 10 or 15 years. There was not one gas station when Henry Ford got going, and then we put a gas station. We know how to make massive change happen when we align around a story. And the story in front of us that does not work is the story of Kal-El and Krypton, and I can show you the planet's going to explode. Let's send a kid over there in the magic blanket. That's not going to be an easy thing to sell. But what we can sell is a story of possibility and community and connection. And so when I say to people, British Petroleum invented carbon footprint, maybe there's someone who worked at British Petroleum a long time ago whose feelings are hurt, but generally, people go, oh, that was done to us. How do we communicate back with each other? That when we understand that an engineer at Exxon wrote a detailed memo in 1983 describing all the causes of climate change, and he was right, oh, why didn't you tell me that? So when we can help people live with the fact that we're all hypocrites and understand that we care about our kids and we don't want to just like start living on the ground in a tent, how do we help people go forward without trying to buy their way out of the problem? Because buying a shirt like this made me happy for 3 minutes, but I already was wearing a shirt when I went to the store, right? Most of the people who are buying fashion aren't naked. So how are we going to build new stories that make us feel good and also cause us to change our actions? And for me, that comes down to seeing the system. So with that, I'm going to stop. Thank you for the work you're doing. I appreciate it. Thank you.
What a fantastic way to end. That was beautiful.